Hello and good evening. This is one of the constituent components of the recently posted 5 race cars that never got off the ground video, posted separately for largely research purposes to determine which car gets a deeper dive video in the future. Enjoy! Continuing with the 1960s theme, but now over in the US, we're going to look at another GT40 contender that wasn't. Chevrolet's CERV 2. Or I'm going to call it the CERV 2 for the rest of the video, even if it was never actually called that, because it's much easier. For most of the middle part of the 20th century, Chevrolet was rather reticent about funding any official racing efforts, apparently due in part to pressure from the federal government, apart from the flashes in the pan that were the lovely Corvette SS and the more successful successor, the still relatively low-profile Stingray racing car designed by Bill Mitchell. They then pivoted to providing tacit and sometimes rather substantial supports to outfits like McLaren and Chaparral, and as such, Chevrolet never pursued an all-out international race program, like Ford were doing with the GT40, following their initial plans for the SS. There was also something to do with the American Auto Manufacturers Union agreement through most of the 50s and early 60s, but be that as it may, they did take another half-hearted back-office stab at it in the early to mid-1960s with this car, the CERV 2. CERV, or CERV, stands for Chevrolet Engineering Research Vehicle, and these cars were the brainchild of one Zora Arkus-Duntov, an engineer and racing driver with 2 class wins at Le Mans to his name, and sufficient input on the design of the Corvette to have earned the moniker the father of the Corvette. The first CERV was an open-wheel mid-engine testbed for ride and handling studies under a variety of conditions, while the second design, the one with which we are concerned this evening, on the other hand, was intended to return Chevrolet to competition where the SS had left off, aimed squarely at several miles of highway in the French countryside by way of Sebring, Florida. Following from the CERV 1, design work on the new car started in late 1961 as the GS2 or GS3, GS standing for Grand Sport. Like its predecessor, it was also mid-engined, and depending on how prescriptive one is, could be considered the genesis of the mid-engined Corvette legend, aimed at taking advantage of the aerodynamic efficiencies that could be realized with such a design. The car also carried over the all-aluminum V8. Yes, we're calling it aluminum because we're on the American side of the ocean, rather than aluminium, which is what we call it when we talk about British cars. Initially expanded to 6.2 liters, or 377 cubic inches, with a single overhead camshaft and Hillborn fuel injection, which provided about 500 horsepower. Mr. Arkus-Duntov wanted to send power to all 4 wheels, which was bold at the time, allegedly drawing inspiration from the even bolder and more pioneering Bugatti T53 from 1932, but in this case it was going through a Powerglide torque converter and 2 of General Motors' 2-speed clutchless manual transmissions. Brief post-editing interjection here that they are clutchless automatics. My apologies. 1 for each axle. There may have been a torque converter for each axle as well. It's not entirely clear in the sources I used. A similar setup would, actually, if memory serves, also see use on the Chaparral 2A, admittedly just sending power to the rear wheels through 1 transmission in that application, but we'll talk more about Chaparral in a minute. As a potential alternative development path should the all-wheel drive approach not work out, a rear-wheel drive version was planned as well, this being labeled the GS2, while the all-wheel drive car was the GS3. A fiberglass roadster body designed by Larry Shinoda and Anatoly Lapin, who would later add the Porsche 924 and 928 to his resume, was draped over the aluminum and steel monocoque and brought total weight to only 1,848 pounds or 838 kilos, with a coupe body intended for the planned 6-car production run. 3 cars would be built to be competition machinery, with the other 3 serving as testing mules and parts cars as needed. The first car was ready in 1964, reportedly surpassing the 210-mile-an-hour mark while testing at Milford Proving Grounds, and Sterling Moss and once and future President Dan Gurney had the honor of running demonstration laps during that year's U.S. Grand Prix at Riverside. However, hopes for tacit approval from the GM executives, or at least the turning of a blind eye to the fact that Mr. Duntov was only in the loosest senses of the term following the rules of GM not being involved in any racing activities, as he intended to sell the GS cars to private individuals and also pretty much give them a key to the spare parts barn, this proved in vain. Before the end of the year, the naughty stick had been brought out from its baize bag, and it was lashings fore and aft for the Corvetsters, with Arcus Duntov told in no uncertain terms that he was not going to race today, that he wasn't indeed the fiberglass messiah.
He's a very naughty boy!
Actually, given that this was not the first time that Mr. Arcus Duntov had been slapped on the wrist for trying to build Chevrolet race cars in circumvention of the AMA ban on manufacturer involvement in racing, and the later federal intervention even more strictly forbidding General Motors from it in particular under pain of being broken up as a monopoly, I wouldn't be that surprised that the GM execs came into the shop one day to find him working away on another race car and basically reenacted this scene from Casablanca.
How can you close me up on what ground? I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.
Nevertheless, now that Arcus Duntov had been told no a bit more directly than even he could try to beg off of, he kept the one GS3 that had been built, changed its designation to CERV 2, which is what we now know it as, and repurposed it as a test car for developing Corvettes of the future, putting in another 6 years of service, providing real-world data on everything from aerodynamic designs to tire compounds to experimental engines. At one point, it was reportedly fitted with a chain-driven V8, before being fitted with a larger
7-liter V8 motor,
dubbed the ZL1, which made almost 550 horsepower and torques, and improved the 0 to 60 time to a reported 2.5 seconds, which, for those of you keeping score at home, is more comparable to the Bugatti Veyrons rather than the Bugatti T53s. Anyway, the order from on high was officially the end of the line for the GS3/CERV2's potential as a racing vehicle, but the advanced design principles previewed by the car seemed to generate incredibly spontaneously over in Jim Hall's neck of the woods with his new Chaparral 2 model, which shockingly sported the aforementioned Chevrolet V8 plus Power Glide torque converter and 2-speed clutchless manual. Automatic, just like the CERV. Oh, did I mention that Jim Hall put in some testing miles of the car at some point as well? Once again, I'm shocked to find racing development going on in this establishment. Actually, this tech transfer apparently came from a different design group within General Motors, Frank Winchell's group, but either way, it's two sides of the same coin. And the CERV 2 was put back in storage until it was donated to the Briggs Cunningham Museum in, I think, the 1970s, subsequently changing hands several times until 2013, when it was sold at auction for $1.1 million, and I'm not sure if it's been seen again since.